With us today, we have our special guest who has a lifelong and depth of knowledge and experience when it comes to the economic management. With us today, we have Honorable John McCallum. John,
Hi,
welcome.
Good to be with you.
John, my first issue in the writing is the infrastructure funding. Could you tell my constituents what is the current state of infrastructure funding that the government made a commitment as part of the budget?
Yeah, well, we supported the budget because we thought the first priority was to get the money out the door to support and save jobs and infrastructure projects and other things. The trouble is they haven't gotten the money out of the door. Our colleague Gerard Kennedy did a survey of hundreds of mayors across the country and found that only 12% of the infrastructure funding had actually hit the ground, actually created and saved jobs. So we think this is unacceptable, that the time of recession is now. The time we need jobs is now. It's no good to have it a year from now or 2 years from now. And so our proposal in the Liberal Party was to have the so-called gas tax transfer mechanism. So the funding would have gone straight to the cities, to the mayors, months ago. And we would have had shovels in the ground and jobs saved months ago, as opposed to this long bureaucratic process that hasn't resulted in the money flowing.
I mean, similar situation is in Surrey and Delta. If we look at only 16% of the funding has flowed into our riding. And there is also a completion date. You know, what are the implications of this completion date requirements that this government has put it in place?
Well, I think the completion date might have been reasonable if they'd been fast at getting the money out. So the money could have gone out early and the jobs completed quite fast. But given that they haven't got the money out yet, I think the completion date might be increasingly realistic, and I think it might be necessary to extend that date. Otherwise, the project simply won't get done at all.
And on the other issue, I have also heard, and I mean, you mentioned Gerard Kennedy. He brought up an analysis where it shows that the money is going on a political basis, going to the conservative riding. Do you agree with his report?
Yes, that's another dimension of it. The first point is they're simply not getting enough money out. And the second point is such money as they are getting out is disproportionately going to the ridings held by conservatives, and especially conservative ministers. The conservative ministers are getting 2 or 3 times more money for ridings where the unemployment rate is relatively low. So it doesn't make sense from an economic point of view. It may make sense from a conservative partisan point of view.
Oh, I mean, certainly in your riding, own riding, the conservative candidate who has come forward and admitted that publicly, in fact, had to be stripped off his candidacy.
Actually, my conservative opponent got fired for telling the truth, because there had been a medical center promised for Markham by Paul Martin, and the town had been lobbying for that since the Conservatives came to power. And my opponent, Gord Landon, said point blank, well, there's no way Markham will ever get that money because Markham's held by a Liberal. That was the truth. But as a consequence, he got fired, and he's no longer the Conservative candidate.
When we look at, I was talking to the Federation of Canadian Municipalities. They are saying that the municipalities are in infrastructure deficit when it comes to the infrastructure. It's about $123 billion and more. How would you see that this can be fixed for generations to come?
Well, I think if I were in charge and the Liberals were in power, I think we'd have 2 paths. The first path would be to get the money out the door fast, and we would use the gas tax mechanism, transfer the money directly to the mayors, and get the shovels in the ground fast. And the second would be more strategic, like Pacific Gateway and other major projects, rapid transit, that are of major significance to the country as a whole. Think out a longer-term strategy, fast trains, lots of things of that nature. And we would put a very high priority to funding those projects, both the ones to be fast through the gas tax and the more strategic ones, because as you just said, Canada has a huge infrastructure deficit which has to be addressed.
when we look at the finance minister, anytime he speaks, the deficit keep on rising, and the economic prosperity for this country is going into the hole. What would you do if we form a Liberal government? How would you manage the economy for the next decade?
Yeah, well, I think it was a year ago yesterday that the finance minister said Canada would have surpluses forever. That's only a year ago. And then we find it's a $34 billion deficit, a $50 billion deficit, a $56 billion deficit. It seems he has no control over these numbers. So the first point is that we don't trust their numbers. Were we to become the government, first order of business is we'd open up the books and ascertain the true state of Canada's finances. And then we would have a long-term plan to balance the books. But I think in the short run, the most important point is that we're still in a very fragile state of the economy. We don't want to cut back at this point and risk falling back into recession. So we would have a fiscally responsible plan, but we would also have initiatives to get Canada back on track. But we would then follow what Chrétien and Martin did. We would have targets, prudent targets over time to get back into a balanced budget.
And if we look at Canada's place in the world, we have done nothing in the last 4 years. How would you see, because when we look at British Columbia, plays a key role in the economic prosperity of Canada, and when we see Canada's future lies in Asia, how would you?
Well, look, it's often said that the 21st century belongs to Asia, and what we've seen recently is that the growth in the world is going on in Asia, in India, in China, and in other Asian countries. The U.S. has been shrinking. So nothing against the U.S. They will always be our major partners and friends. But we have to diversify. We have to expand our trade and investment with Asia, with India, with China, with other Asian countries. And the problem, and this is particularly important for British Columbia, is that the Harper government keeps insulting China and ignoring India. Now they're trying, almost 4 years into the game, to reverse that. They realize they made a mistake. But for the first 2 or 3 years, they have consistently insulted China and ignored India. And that is not the way to go. Michael Ignatieff has been very clear. He mentions Asia all the time, that a high priority for a Liberal government would be to build and strengthen economic and cultural and social ties with Asian countries.
So in last 30 seconds, is there anything particular that message you will give my constituents of Newton North Delta?
Well, I appreciate having this opportunity to talk to them through you. I would say to them that they have an excellent member of Parliament who's working very hard for them. And I would also say to them that a Liberal government would certainly focus on growing the economy, but we would also focus on helping vulnerable Canadians, those who fall between the cracks, whether at home or abroad.
Thank you.
Thank you very much, Sukh.